Bonjour tout le monde, c'est Obsidian Chibre avec une nouvelle vidéo pour vous aujourd'hui.
And we're coming from the test server, part of episode 45, Shock to the System, which has a release date of April the 20th, so this week. And we're looking at the new artifact, Ebon's Untethered Shadow. So the reason why I haven't shown this artifact up until now is that there's been aspects of it not working as intended. There are still aspects of it not working as intended, but at least it's in a state where I can explain this artifact because there are a lot of people interested in it. So taking a look just at the description, using a superpower grants a shady loan up to a maximum of 5, 10 shady loans total. Think of it like stacks. Each shady loan increases the power cost of future abilities, excluding finisher tagged abilities, by 20, 15, 10, 5%, and increases might by 1, 2, 2, and 3% for 6 seconds. Casting a finisher burns all stacks of shady loans, granting 1, 2, 2, and 3% damage reduction per stack. Burning a maximum stack of shady loans grants a burst of power and increased incoming power. So the best way I can explain this is that Linera's Amulet basically increases the damage that you take based on the power cost of the ability and increases your might. Ebon's Untethered Shadow is the same concept, but instead of damaging you, think of it as damaging your power bar. It's going to increase the power cost of your abilities, which means that your power bar gets reduced instead. So for example, there's three things you have to be aware of at the start of this. It could be fixed before released. I mean, release is coming in a couple days now, so I'm not entirely sure that it's going to be released, but I know Heart of Isis was fixed like the day before release as well. So this could change, but what you want to watch out for are three things. One, at the moment, this has no effects that it's active. So if I just kind of spam jackhammer here, there's absolutely no animation or effects to know that the artifact is active. It used to have the same animation as Linera's, which basically was like the hand grab. So if you didn't know, the little hand, and then eventually when you're at 10 stacks, it's going to reach out and grab you, etc. So that's what the animation was, but at the same time, that didn't make a lot of sense because then people would think you're using Amulet, but you're not using Ebon, and then if you're using both, you don't know if both are active. So that's the first thing to be aware of. That there's no animation to show that it's active presently. The second thing to be aware of is that it should be increasing your power cost. So for example, jackhammer power cost 200, which means that each time I use jackhammer, it's 29,834 power. And we know that Ebon's Untethered Shadow increases the power cost of abilities and then creates a stack. So when I'm using this, so say if I go back to using jackhammer, if I go to my loadout, that power cost should have changed. It should reflect the increased power cost ability. So if I'm at 10 stacks, that should be, like a 60k, 40k move. So it's hard to judge how much power you're using because this ability doesn't update. Same thing, if I go, if I spam jackhammer and go to my current effects, there's no current effects. That's just the max damage mod on my hand. But there's no current effects that I'm under Ebon's Untethered Shadow at all. You may ask, how do you know if it's working? So if I look at my might, like this is just base might, right now I'm at 225. If I start to use jackhammer, 241. And then if I did this long enough to be at like say 10 stacks, I think it's like 270, 280, 278. So the might is increasing, just as it would as Linera's. So that's why throughout this test, you're going to have to just kind of trust that it's working. Because you may not be readily apparent that it is because you don't know the power cost. If you're using like a rotation, say like Earth with a bunch of like 200 power cost moves, or if you're testing on these sparring targets here, they provide power return. You're not going to easily notice that it's actually working. If you're using a bunch of like 300 power cost moves, maybe like a heavy munitions rotation with like mini nuke or like celestial or light or atomic, a heavy power cost power. Then you'll see it. You'll just be able to use, you won't be able to do as long as a rotation. The other way to know that's working is, so if I just put on Amulet and switch over to the Combat tab. So if I start to do Amulet, and you see here, we're at 10 stacks. So if I go to my combat log, Amulet started 5, 7, 9, 11, 12, 14, 17, 19, 22, and 26. And then when I was at 10 stacks of Amulet, I was always using 26k damage. So now if we just got out of combat here to regen my health. Now if we put Amulet and Ebon on, because you have to remember that the Linares damage, as you see, when using superpower, take its power cost and damage and gain a stack of offerings. So that means each Amulet stack is basically a stack of might or might increased based on your power cost ability. That's why you are always doing 100 power cost moves or gadgets or spamming like napalm grenade to always keep it 10 stacks, etc. So you have to be aware of that when you use Amulet, because it's based on your power cost equals your damage. And E-bombs, your power cost increases your might, but also increases the power cost, which means that when I'm using the Linares and E-bomb together, I'm going to get more damage from Linares. So I'll explain that here. So as you saw, all the way from 5k to 26k, now that I've got both equipped, if I go and do it again, so now I'm at 10 stacks, and now you see it changes. So I did go from 5, 7, 9, 11, 12, 14, 17, 19, 22, 26. Now I'm going from 5, 8, 11, 13, 15, 19, 22, 27, 32, and 39. So the difference between 10 stacks with Amulet was 26. And another 13k on top of that was from E-bombs. So that's the main takeaway here, is that it increases your might, but also increases the power cost. And if you have that synergy with Amulet, it's obviously going to increase your power cost as well, which I'll show you. So if we take this, if we take Amulet off, you remember that I was at 278k. I mean, it'll be roughly, because I mean, what Linares is a 5% base might artifact. So if we put on Solar, then it's going to be a closer comparison. So my base right now is 237. And if I max with E-bomb, it goes to 200, and you saw like 293. So going from a base of 237 to 293, that was like what, 60k might roughly. So now if I take off Solar, put it on Amulet, and get to 10 stacks of both. Now my might is looking at 344k. And we'll just let it expire, because I didn't show the base might. So my might went from 236k to the 340k. So yes, there's a huge might increase at the basically because you're thinking of like the double might buff together. But you have to be aware of that. Not only now in alerts and raids and content, not only are you causing damage to yourself, you're also losing power, and that increased power is causing the damage to Linares. So now you become think of it like a double liability to the group. So before you need a controller to keep E-bombs active, now you need a healer to keep you active even more with Linares. So that's the trade-off and how you know it's working. So I'll touch on some rotations now. We'll get into more in depth, but I wanted to at least kind of explain how this artifact worked and kind of show this more importantly at the beginning of the video, just so that you're aware. Because once again, it's somewhat hard to test this because I don't have a controller and a healer in the group as well. So let's get down to some examples and break this down a little bit further here for you. So taking a look at the second aspect of E-bomb's Tethered Shadow, casting a finisher burns all stacks of Shady Loans, granting a 203% damage reduction per stack, and then grants a burst of power increase, power healing. So basically the concept of that was designed with using Amulet, because the whole concept or the synergy with this artifact was that you would use E-bombs and Amulet together. So basically when you use a finisher, you'd get the health increase or the health return from Linares Amulet, and then you get the damage reduction with E-bombs, so that if you went back into using it and getting your stacks again, you're getting less damage from Linares because you have the damage reduction from using a finisher with Ebon. So it's basically just there to help you out. I wouldn't say unintended, but the way you can use that as a tank, specifically Rage, is that E-Chain is a finisher. It's coded as a finisher. That means so every time if I'm using E-Bomb as a Rage tank, and you're thinking, oh, why would you use a DPS artifact as a tank? It's just think of like Clarion. So if I use a weapon buff with Clarion, I get the shield increased healing. Now if I use E-Bombs, when I use a finisher as a tank, I get the damage reduction. So at 10 stacks, I get 30% damage reduction when I'm using a finisher. And as Rage, I'm using a finisher regardless to cancel my rotation. And as Rage, you're encouraged to kind of not so much spam Ragebringer, but you're encouraged to use Ragebringer because it increases your hit counter easily, so that increases your tank stats. So if we look at if you're not as familiar with Rage, if we go back to Rage here, as your combo meter increases, gain health equal to the percentage of your dominance up to 50%. So basically, as your combo meter increases to a certain point, you get the increased health. And then Ragebringer is also 100 power cost move. So if I'm spamming that with E-Bomb, it's not really a huge power issue because it's only 100 power cost move. And when I use the finisher with E-Bomb, it's going to give me my power return. So not like I'm saying this is OP or anything like that, but it's one of those things where if you can work a weapon buff into your tank rotation with Clarion, you can also work a finisher into your rotation as a tank to take advantage of this damage reduction. And as Rage, it's anyway. So think like this is more maybe for future planning, because say when the Gemini eventually gets changed on live server, then as a Rage, you really don't have a third artifact. You can certainly run like Refractor, Lazarus. I mean, there's obviously options, but now this kind of adds another mix into the rotation for tanks. If you're not using a supercharge, and maybe you don't care about the health buff for the group with a Refractor, you can run E-Bomb for yourself for that damage reduction. So let me just show you how it works here. So we're on the Pride Bounty. And then we'll kind of just increase the combat log here so you can kind of see it as I go. So right now I've got E-Bomb equipped. And if I'm just using the pull, I'm going to get to the 10 stacks. The 10 stacks isn't going to take, I'm getting the increased power cost, but it's not actually going to take effect until I'm at 10 stacks. So I'm doing this just so you can see myself take damage. So you can see what the actual hit's for. So the melee attacks, range attacks like 34. Let's see if I can get punted or back fisted. And he's going to cooperate. There's the hammer fist. There's the punt. Okay. So now let's take through the finisher here. And you'll see kind of the gray numbers here, but as I'm going, is he actually going to attack me? You might have to do this a couple times just so you can see here, but as you're following, the gray numbers will be the damage reduction numbers. Pride Bounty isn't like the best case scenario. Let me just get back. That's the one downside with no animation, as you saw in the beginning of the video, is because that I don't know when I'm at 10 stacks necessarily, so we'll just use the finisher again. You see the massive power increase, so it's really not an issue with being a power cost for Rage. Okay, so now that's a good enough example. Let me just get up here so we can see the combat log. So if we scroll up here at the beginning, let's see, we had Hammer Fist being 54k, the melee attacks are 34 to like 39k. I did see a punt there. Punt was 85k. And then if we look at the punt damage with E-Bombs active, the melee attacks go from 37, 39 to 23. The Hammer Fist went from, let's see, did I get Hammer Fist before? Hammer Fist was 54k down to 31. And the punt was from 80, where it's at 85k to 56k. And this is, I'm not doing anything as a Rage tank. I'm not doing anything extra because I have to cancel Rage Crash anyway. So the reason why I'm not doing Severe or Redirected Rage or Remorseless is because Fervor increases your defense, so that's going to throw off the numbers. So that's why I'm only using a pull and E-Chain to demonstrate this, because I don't want the extra defense playing a factor. But yeah, it's so. As other tanks like Fire, Ice, it's going to be a little bit awkward to work into a finisher rotation. Like I said, it's possible, but as specifically as a Rage tank, you got to cancel anyway. I know there's some Rage tanks that use like Dreadful to cancel, and I mean that's in some situations Dreadful can be useful as a cancel, But for myself, I always prefer running E-Chain as a cancel. I think it's dreadful just in case it does have a CC move. I mean, technically it extends the duration, so if you use it early, then you could combo into it to be interruptible. But for me, I've been a rage tank since release, and I've always been comfortable using E-Chain. But that's the thing. So if I'm using a finisher with E-Bomb, then I'm getting the extra power. You saw that huge power return burst that I got. So then even if I was low power as rage to be able to hit severe again, I don't have that issue because I'm going to get the power return. And then the advantage is that, so I'm using a finisher to cancel rage crash, but I can't use rage crash again for 4 seconds. So I'm using like redirect rage or hard lead shield, something to shield me until the healing is back, the rage is back. But with E-Chain and E-Bomb, I've got that 30% damage reduction. So now it's helping me even more on top as a rage tank. I can cancel using the finisher. The finisher gives me damage reduction on top of everything else being a shield. Like the damage reduction stacks on top of defense. So I'm going to get the extra defense. I'm going to have the shielding, the damage reduction, and then my severe is going to come back and I'm perfectly fine as a rage tank. So it's going to be an example that can be applied to other tanks, but it just works so seamlessly with the rage because I'm using a finisher regardless in the rotation. And I need the extra damage reduction because I have a cooldown on severe. So that's one example how you can use this as a tank. I know the intention of it was as a DPS, so that it basically gives you more like damage relief on linear stacks. But this is just one way how you can apply it to tanking to be actually quite effective. So before I jump and show some DPS examples of average damage rotations, I did want to show more so as a warning, because it's all fine and dandy if you want to have as high as might and see the highest number you can get using Amulet E-Bomb and think that's synergy, but it's going to be very rotation dependent, because if you start having to use a finisher, mixing in a finisher rotation just so you can get the health and power return, you know, those rotations are not going to be as successful as just regular rotations. So for example, I've got, as you saw, I've got Amulet E-Bomb on. I'm just going to sit here and then get 10 stacks just to show you what it's actually going to look like in content. You got the combat log up. So now I'm at 10 stacks. So if I, go to the sparring targets and try to do a rotation, I'm dead. In 3 moves, I was dead using Amulet E-Bomb. And you saw in the combat log there, so at 10 stacks on the rotation, I'm taking 234k damage and 135k damage. And that's just the regular like the regular gadget range rotation is just Ebon or napalm clip with suppressor, fear gas clip. I'm not even using stealth. I'm not using robot sidekick out. So just trying to clip napalm, suppressor turret, and then fear gas, which was 100, 300, and 200. So that's technically a 600 power cost move in the attempt. Just doing that in that short window, I died. So are you really expecting so 2 things to take account here. Are you really expecting a healer in a raid to heal you every time you use a power for like 234, 135k damage, or even the 78k damage? This was just napalm spam. So if you're just spamming napalm grenade, it's 78k damage. Are you really expecting a healer to do that? Every half second that you use napalm grenade, you're dealing 80k damage to yourself. You expect a healer in content to heal you through that? That's not happening. I mean, it doesn't matter what the healer is. I mean, if no one else in the group is taking damage, then sure. But you've got to think that you're stealing the tank's priority. I mean, what, you expect healers to change to like running orb rotate, like Orb of Rhine rotations again, just to heal you through artifacts as a DPS? That's ridiculous. So then you're thinking, well, I can still use that. I just need a finisher. But even as a finisher, you're not going to survive 234k, 135k damage. That's going to be like half your health in just one clip. I'm not even talking rotation. That's one clip. So then you're getting to like 4 or 5 stacks with Amulet and E-Bomb, then using a finisher and always maintaining that 5-6 stacks. But then your might's reduced, the damage is reduced. So why are you going to try to like basically nerf your rotation just so you can maintain 5 or 6 stacks, which is not that much might? So we can try to do this here. So as you saw, let's get to 10 stacks here just to show what the might would be. So I'm at 10 stacks now. The might's 348k. And we'll just let that expire. So we're back down to normal, 242. So if I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I'm at 305k might. So that's what you'd, theoretically, that's what you'd have to do is now I would have to add in Photon Blast or Clip Photon Blast into rotation just so that I can always maintain 4 or 5 stacks or 6 stacks in this case, so that I'm not going to be an instant death to the group. Because at 6 stacks, Amulet and Ebon was about 31k damage, which is, if you saw in the beginning of my video, which is pretty much standard for Amulet. Amulet damage without Ebon was like 26k. So a healer could theoretically, depending on the healers, survive 31k damage in terms of the rotation, because that's similar to what they would have been healing if you were using an Amulet as a DPS. But if you go beyond that, then you're looking at 50k, 50k, 60k, 78k. That's not realistic. That's not practical for a healer to, especially with either the Gemini getting adjusted at this release. Healers not running pure heal builds. They're going to be using EOG spam builds. You're not going to get that type of healing. So then you got to use napalm, suppressor turret, fear gas, then you got to work on a photon clip, and then you got to start over again. And at that point, you're basically changing the rotation so much that the average damage of a regular one, just using like Transstrat Quizlet, is going to be better. So that's what just the warning is, just to be aware of the actual damage and the healing numbers that you're going to cause. And now this just isn't for gadgets, but I mean that rotation is not far off. A 100 power cost move, a 200 power cost move. The 300 is the big one. 300 rotation is not practical with E-Bomb. It's just going to be too much damage with Amulet. So that's the outlier. But then if you take out Suppressor Turret and then I'm just using Napalm on Fear Gas, then once again you're nerfing the rotation. You're taking longer to use the Napalm grenade clip, and then basically it slows down the rotation, slows down the damage, because the whole point of using Suppressor Turret was basically to get right away back into Fear Gas or Napalm. So that's why you're always changing your rotation so much just to use these artifacts. You've changed it to the point where it's not going to be high enough damage. So let's take a look at some examples and then kind of further show you. Okay, so taking a look at some results here. Now, bear in mind, the purpose of this video is basically just to show you how E-Bombs works, give you some examples, and then do essentially a review of the artifact and how useful I find it. It's not an in-depth review of the DPS side of it. I'm not testing like pet damage, single target, AoE, multiple power sets. I can do that in another video. That's going to take way more time to find rotations that work. This is basically just to show you that it's working as intended and give you an idea of how it can function and work for yourself. So with that in mind, I obviously in the example, I can't test E-Bombs and Amulet together. That's gonna have to be tested in content with a healer to see how practical it is, a healer and controller, I should say. So there's gonna be different levels to see if you can even maintain a 10 stack with other power sets, if you have to maintain a 5 or 6 stack, to see, we're gonna need to test to see how we can use that in content without being completely overwhelming to the controller and the healer. So the purpose of this video is to see Transstrat is going to be in the rotation for melee. For a single target, it's not. You can technically drop strategists. It's not going to be as heavily needed on single target for might. So that's where the possibility where you could be Trans Amulet E-Bomb for a single target. So that's a possibility to see, because then you're going to have finishers. You can play around with the stacks. So that's where it could be more viable, but at least on an AoE perspective, to see the impact that the increased might has on strategists versus Quizlet, let's take a look. So I did a gadgets rotation, as you saw in the example. The average damage with Transstrat Quizlet was 2.5, and then Transstrat E-Bomb was 2.4. So not a huge difference in the average damage. You do have to bear in mind that this rotation, I had 52,000 more might, 239 to 291. So the average damage is slightly lower, pretty much like the rotations are similar, 249, 250. The rotations are not that far off in terms of the criticals and everything else. But you have to bear in mind that this had 52,000 more might, and for Quizlet, I'm not getting the supercharge regen. I'm not getting every time I use a supercharge. I'm not getting the extra refractor damage from Quizlet. So there's more benefits to Quizlet in this rotation. So even the average damage is higher in this case, but I'd still rather run Quizlet than Ebon because for one, I'm not being any more drained on the controller and I'm getting more bonuses with Quizlet overall. So then I took a look at an Earth example. This is more like just straight jackhammer spam and clipping some a 200 and 300 power cost move just to see if you could maintain it on the sparring targets, which you could. I didn't have an issue with power. So same thing, average damage here was just over 3 mil, and this is 3.1. So once again, not a giant difference in rotation. Yes, Ebon was better, but at the same time, I got 52,000 extra might for jackhammer spam, and then jackhammer is going to proc strategist cards, and the strategist card procs are going to be higher because the higher might. So that's why it's not a huge difference between you've got the gadget rotations, you've got the Earth rotations, not a giant difference. So it comes out to a wash baseline damage, but the same thing. I'm not getting the extra bonuses from Quizlet overall. So when I use a supercharge, technically yes, your supercharge damage would be higher because you got higher might, but at the same time you've got the Quizlet damage. So in the end, it may be a wash. So that's why I'm saying Ebon versus Quizlet may end up being a wash, not for pet DPSing because obviously you need Quizlet, but it gives that possibility. You could get away with Ebon, get the higher might, and then your damage should be similar, but then in certain situations it could be higher. But ideally, you're not leveling Ebon just to run it over Quizlet or run it over EOG or another artifact. You ideally want to use Ebon and Amulet together to get the max potential, but it's going to come down to where you're finding that potential. Where is the balance between what stacks you can maintain yourself and then the stacks on with Ebon. So it's going to be, can you only maintain a 4, or can you only maintain a 5 or 6? Can you maintain a 10 in some groups, and see what that damage lies? So that's going to take further testing. Like I said, the purpose of this video is just to show you some examples how you can use it. In my opinion, I'm going to level Ebon, of course. I think it's going to be great for some experimentation, especially as a tank. I'm liking it and finding different rotations with finishers that could be viable, especially as rage. If you're a rage DPS, I would 100% level this. So if you're a rage player, 1000% level Ebon, because for one, the rage rotation, I'm sure it's just gonna be like Earth. It's gonna be higher damage because you're running higher might. You've got the damage reduction for tank. You've got the potential resoothing amulet because then you'd have the heal back from severe as a DPS. Not that it's gonna save you, but it's gonna help. So so definitely as a rage player, it's 100% level. But for other DPS, if you've got the extra nth metal, I would level it as an experimentation artifact because I think there's going to be a rotation out there that is going to do very well with the Amulet Ebon. So take care, guys. Leave your comments in the comment section below, and we'll see you in the next video.